Greetings and welcome to another edition of AUHSD Future Talks. I'm your host, Michael Matsuda, the superintendent of the Anaheim Union High School District. And as our 6,000 plus listeners know, that this show is all about the future of education and how AUHSD is transforming education and hopefully serving as a model for public schools nationally. And this We've been so blessed to have many, many leaders across the spectrum of education, from presidents of colleges to deans to CEOs of businesses. And today we're very blessed to have two very special guests, founders of the Mindkind Institute based in New York City, Dr. Nguyen and Sarah Suatoni, an executive coach and therapist. So welcome to the show, both of you.
Thanks, Michael.
Thanks, Michael.
It's great to be here.
Yeah. So we generally start the show with, kind of who you are in your own personal calling, Dr. Home. I know that you've had TED Talks on who you are and your whole journey as a Vietnamese refugee Bo person and the trauma, not only to you and collectively to the Vietnamese community, but also connecting that trauma to trauma today with so many young people, especially experiencing that. Could you elaborate a little bit on who you are and a little bit on your journey to founding Mindkind?
Thank you. I started my career in my 20s by dropping out of university and started a theater company called Club Noodles, the first Vietnamese American theater company. And we use theater and storytelling as a way to help Vietnamese immigrants at that time figure out how to make meaning of their lives coming to the United States, because that was my own experience, having lived through the war in Vietnam and the aftermath of it. Then in my 30s, I was doing a lot of work with doing HIV and AIDS education at the time, because that was also a trauma, painful time for many people, myself included, coming out as a gay man at that time. And so when I returned back to school and to get my master's and my doctorate, I wanted to study mindfulness in the context of leadership and organization, looking at how leaders develop mindfulness not only for themselves, but how do they go about helping other people in their organization to cultivate mindfulness and compassion. And so that's how the Mindkind Institute was founded, with that vision in mind, bringing mindfulness and compassion into the workplace. And so it has been such a joy and a pleasure for me to work with AUHSD.
Yes, and you received your PhD from Columbia University in mindfulness. Is that my understanding? Yes.
In mindfulness and organizational development.
How do you define mindfulness?
I don't use that term as often anymore. I often use the term mind kindness, which the framework that Mindkind is using. Mindfulness, the tradition of it is to focus on the breath and the body as a way to get to know oneself, which is a very foundational and powerful practice. However, what I would like for us to have a conversation now is not just about mindfulness, but about mind kindness, the mind and the heart, the mind, the heart, the spirit. And then when we bring it to organization, we're not only looking at the individual development, but at the team development as well as organization. So I would like to focus on the mind kindness as a new term.
Okay. Sarah, so let's hear a little bit about your amazing journey.
Well, I think maybe I'll start with Dr. Home and I have lots in common. And one of the first things is that we both dropped out of college. I went to Cornell's School of Industrial and Labor Relations because I really yearned, really from a young age, to have impact on organizational change. And after about a year and a half, I had burnt out already on the stress and the challenge and the chaos that organizational life can induce. So I turned 180 degrees towards dance. I became a professional dancer, and then eventually a body worker, a body work healer, and eventually a psychotherapist, a marriage and family therapist. And in that journey, I share all of that because my roots are really in the relationship between the mind and the body, in a passion for helping people connect to their body as a resource to facilitate healing. So my therapy practice had an expertise in family systems and in trauma. And after 20 years of running that practice, I found myself yearning to go back into organizational life, like recognizing that a lot of the mental health issues that we see begin at work. They live at work in the very least. Like, I wasn't finding I could have the impact I wanted to, one person at a time. And so in seeking to return to organizational work, I became an executive coach, and I found Dr. Home, who was bringing mindfulness into organizations at the time. And together with a lot of dialogue, we talked about what would it be like to bring emotional intelligence, mindfulness, and embodiment together to help people create change internally, one person at a time, but also on a systems level.
And this is kind of the work that Fred Kaufman is interested in as well, right? And that's the author of The Conscious Business, which we use through you guys as a sort of a guidebook. So, Sarah, what is the difference between mindfulness and mind kindness that Dr. Home is talking about?
It's a great question. I think there's a lot of ways to answer it. So Mindkind is a practice. You would experience it perhaps like a mindfulness practice. We do pause, sit, breathe, and connect to our bodies. But mindkindness is also a framework. And so in that way, I think of the mindkindness practice more like a contemplative self-awareness practice, right? We ask questions around building emotional intelligence, on learning how to practice emotional regulation, on learning how to use gratitude and growth mindset in the capacity of relating to others. And so in a way, I think what we're doing at Mindkind, our mission is really making mindfulness and emotional intelligence really tangible and actionable in the workplace, right? So it's practical skill building. You can use mind kindness. In fact, we could use it right now. We could do a practice. Would you like to experience it right this minute?
A very short one, so
Very
our
short.
audience can just get maybe their heads wrapped around. So
Great. So let's imagine that you are just about to go into a stressful meeting, and your heart's pounding a little bit, and you're worried about the outcome. So imagine that you take just 1 minute to lift your shoulders up around your ears and actually amplify the tension you're feeling for a second. And feel that tension gather, and then roll your shoulders back and let them go. And take a few long, slow breaths. Noticing the breath as it comes and it goes. Each inhale, a chance to draw your focus inside for a moment. Each exhale, a chance to calm down. And with this internal awareness, asking yourself, how am I feeling in this moment? Simply naming your internal weather right now. And with the next breath or two, bringing your focus back into the room around you. Recognizing that now that you've named how you're feeling, you have the ability to choose your response. And so as you ready yourself to go into this stressful meeting, perhaps you'll choose a word like calm or present or centered or strong to anchor your intention. So there's a practice. What was that like?
Well, I think that to try to get the body more in sync with the emotions is very intentional, right? Work, because so many of us are in bodies that are become very passive receptacles, and not that synchronous piece or synchronous practice. I think that's so important. Why, Dr. Holm, can you sort of explain to the audience the science behind what we just did? Why? Because, when I talk to people about mindfulness or mind kindness in this practice, it just seems so simple. How could that cure me?
Well, there are different ways to talk about the science in terms of there's the neuroscience, which I'm going to pass to Sarah to talk about that. But I think for me, science means experiment and then noticing, paying attention to what the data is, and then reflect on that data, and then make new meaning out of that data. That's what the basic understanding of science is: experiment, experience, make meaning, and then having insight. So the best way for me to explain the science of this is through experience. Just now, Sarah offered a very short but very targeted experience of what it means to bring ourselves into the present moment. And so the audience, as you're listening to this, just notice what it's like to be in your own body, noticing where the mind is. Is it in the future, or is it in the past, or is it here in your body in this breath? And so the science for me is through practice. Now I'm going to pass to Sarah to talk about the research behind this.
Thanks. So yeah, there's a lot of research in the field of neuroscience. But what I actually love about that research, Michael, is that it's just an affirmation of what we already know, right? So what we know from neuroscience is that we have the capacity to move back and forth from our fight, flight, freeze response into our neocortical brain. But it takes pausing, noticing, and then using the physical body to calm down in order to do that. So what we're literally doing is creating a bridge from one part of the brain to the next through practice. And that what we know also from neuroscience is the more that you practice this, the better you get. Like your bridges get bigger and better and easier to access. But another way of talking about this is we all know that we get butterflies in our stomach. We all know that we get a pain in the neck when we're stressed. So turning to the body and using it as a resource that helps us learn more about how we are and how we feel is actually built into our language. It's simply been perhaps a lost language as we've gotten more and more head first, should we say, more and more head centric. So learning, there's a beautiful book called The Body Keeps Score, written about trauma by Bessel van der Kolk. And he explains, it's a ginormous book, so I'm going to summarize it in one sentence to say that the title says it all, right? The body keeps score. So when we can tune into the body, we have a resource that we walk around with all the time. And the science shows that physically we have the capacity to shift our experience by shifting our body, and we can shift our body by shifting our experience. And that reciprocal.
Yeah, so in a way it's all about sort of reprogramming our body, right? But the awareness, the pause, in anticipation of this fight or flight, right, response to, let's say that, going back to your example of, we're going to have a speech or something like that, there's a lot of anxiety and butterflies. We can take a pause and sort of attempt to, make new patterns, right, with our body and choose our responses, right, until that becomes sort of part of the autonomous response system. Because right now we've been programmed, right, based on childhood trauma or other traumas, right, and that sort of interferes with our ability to choose our emotional response.
Yes, exactly.
That's what we're trying to get to.
Yes.
So, both of you described sort of an experiential, Dr. Holm, description of the breathing and sort of experiencing that sensation of what's happening in your mind and body. And then Sarah also bringing in science around the neuroscience. So there's a lot going on in a 2 to 3 minute exercise, right? Mm-hmm. So how do I think, Dr. Holm, your whole, academic studies have been on, okay, so how do we take that knowledge and sort of transfer that to organizations?
Yes.
Right. Yes. So can you elaborate on what that means? How do we do that? How do we create this culture of the organizational sort of learning culture?
Yes. So when mindfulness being popularized in mainstream, a lot of people have this impression that if I bring mindfulness into the organization, I'll get, the student to do it or the staff to do it. Or if I change myself, then I can change the organization. Now, that is true, but also it's only partially true. And so in Mindkind, what we have through our own experience with working with organizations is that we have this principle called top down, bottom up, inside out, and then all around. And so what that means is that for an organization to evolve and to transform, the leadership need to buy in and then practice. So one of the things that I remember having a conversation with you, I remember saying to you, are you willing to practice and do everything you will ask your staff and your student to do? Because if you're unwilling to do that as the leader of the organization, then actually a lot of time it creates what we call organizational insanity, where the leadership is telling everybody else to do it, but they're unwilling to do it. Right?
Well, that's kind of like family dysfunction, right?
Yes,
exactly.
If the parents are dysfunctional, oftentimes the kids become dysfunctional, but they blame the kids, right?
Yes.
And I think same thing with organizations, right? If the employees are dysfunctional, then we blame the employees, but we're trying to create this healthy, functional balance, right?
Yes.
Centered.
Yes.
I'm very interested because in this, how we respond to this pandemic and COVID. And I think it's whenever I do the breathing, I think about the COVID literally takes away our breath, right? Something we take for granted. I want to put that on the table because I'd like to explore that concept of COVID literally killing us and taking away the breath, yet something we take for granted, and so much of mindkindness is rooted in the breath. Could we explore that a little bit more? I'm very interested in hearing from you about that piece. And it leads to why this is so important, this work. Sarah, I'm sorry.
Yes, I love the question. I think there's so many answers, Michael. I'm hearing you say, in some ways, is this taking away of the breath a metaphor for something that's going on multiple levels in our world? And I think it's important to mention that to breathe is to inspire, which translates from, I think, the Greek or Latin word to bring in spirit. So to breathe is to simply notice the life force that we have, and that we don't have to do anything to earn. And so in this condition of having our breath taken away, right, of being breathless and actually being masked, also as a powerful aspect of this, we see a metaphor for something that's going on so many levels, where we have moved away from an awareness of our ability to connect to our life force. And we have the choice. I think that COVID then is, like all crises, an opportunity to choose to pay attention, to our breath, to choose to feel our life force, to choose to ask big questions like, what really matters? What really inspires me? And to recognize the gift that life is.
It is a gift. And when I do the breathing, I often think about that gift of life, right? And at the same time, thinking about our own mortality, right? And the more, I guess, we acknowledge that, the more we appreciate the breath and the gift of living. Dr. Holm, Sarah talks about this natural built-in fight or flight response, but is Mindkind offering a third response of sort of love and kindness?
Yes. So the breath is so powerful, and mindfulness, the foundation of mindfulness is the breath and the body. I think where mindkindness take it to the next level is to have the understanding that we're working with people and we're working with systems that has been traumatized, and observing the breath alone or observing the body alone without other way to regulate the psychological safety actually become very difficult. So a lot of time when people do meditation and then they suddenly get to the point where, like, oh, I cannot do this. This is not for me. And they leave, partly because that's a trigger of something deeper inside that people don't know how to work with. So whereas Mindkind is a trauma-sensitive, trauma-informed practice, where we not only observe the breath, observe the body, we also observe our attitude, where we pay attention to how do we be grateful for things, how to cultivate curiosity, cultivate contentment, the knowing of enough, that in this moment, I have enough, I do enough, I am enough. And so that in itself also a countercultural practice to unhook ourselves from the programming that's saying that we're not enough. We need to buy more, do more, buy more, get bigger, and so on. And then through contentment, we experience the depth of true love, compassion, unconditional loving kindness to ourselves, and then the understanding that we all suffer, so therefore we can be compassionate with others as well. So that's where empathy and compassion comes in. And then finally, the eighth practice of mindkindness is learning to let go. And I think we are also living through a time where we're being challenged with what it means for us to let go of what was. And then how do we live into the new reality that we are experiencing now? And so I think that's where the power of mindkindness come in, both at an individual level and as well as the team level and the organization level.
Are there examples, Dr. Holm, of this type of transformation at the organizational level where you've worked and you've actually seen that transformation and this new culture?
Well, part of me want to turn that question back to you.
You mean, am I seeing that in our
district? Yeah, we have the chance to work together for the last few years. And what do you notice in terms of yourself as a leader of an organization? And then what do you notice among your team? Yeah,
I would say it's a continuum, but definitely we are creating a culture of compassion and self-awareness. This work is, it's not easy to lead by example when it's been so challenging with COVID on top of everything else in terms of a very complex jobs for educators.
Yes.
But I think in terms of the balance that we seek from the personal and the professional balance, that for me, that's been, I think, my biggest learning and growth have been, this whole sense that I am enough, I do enough, because educators get on that treadmill of work and somehow their identity becomes their work rather than their identity becoming the person who I am. And that's hard sometimes to disconnect from that.
Yes. I mean, we have many people who have reported through surveys and feedback to us that the practice of mind kindness and the community that we are building around practice and conversation, and I think another important aspect of our work is around conscious communications, how we relate to each other, how do we speak to each other, how do we listen to each other, how we give feedback to each other. And I think all of that is so important, especially living in a time where people are feeling more isolated, more disconnected, more anxiety, more anxious, right? And so then how do we as humans relating to each other in a different way?
Well, when you say that, I'm always I've asked this question before, but why are we so stingy with love?
That's a beautiful question.
I think the answer is fear. Right. Again, we move quickly back to the body and the default. Our default mode is fear. And when we're in fear, it's hard for us to find our connection to our heart, to our sense of love. But there are skills that you can learn. There's ways to actually build those bridges back to your heart, back to your sense of connection. And I wanted to, back to your question, Michael, about are we potentially creating a new response to rather than a fight, flight, freeze? There was interesting work that Shelley Taylor did. I think she was from UCLA, and she noticed during earthquakes that there was a certain number of people in the building that actually, rather than doing a fight, flight, freeze response, moved into the coffee room and started talking. And so she developed this question: is it possible that some people have naturally a tend and befriend response to trauma? And one way of framing our work is, I think that that's what we're seeking to build, is a tend and befriend response. Trauma will never stop, but we can choose actually to come together. And I think, listening to you talk about how hard it is for school leaders, how hard it is for parents, how hard it is for children right now to juggle their reality in this time, I'm aware that what we've seen is that more than ever, we can't do it alone. Our work has grown more and more community oriented. We're more and more we're being called to bring community-based work as in inviting groups of people into conversation, because each of us has a tendency to just turn back to our computer and keep working. But when we are reminded of another person, another face, another conversation, through our colleagues, through our friends, through our loved ones, we're brought into community, and that brings us into love.
Yes, absolutely. Well, we can go on and on about love and about fear, but we are so grateful that we have both of you and the Mindkind Institute as a partner to the AUHSD and trying to build that third option. And I think we are on our way. And on behalf of our leadership and our teachers, and most importantly, our kids, thank both of you so much for your work with AUHSD.